A picture book of John and Abigail Adams by David Adler and Michael Adler, illustrated by Ronald Himmler. John Adams of Massachusetts was an American patriot, one of the great men of his time and a founder of our nation. His most trusted advisor, his dearest friend for more than 50 years, was his wife Abigail. John Adams was born on October 19, 1735, in Braintree, now Quincy, Massachusetts. He was the eldest of John and Susanna Boylston Adams' 3 sons. His father was a farmer, a deacon in the local church, and a lieutenant in the militia. Young John Adams enjoyed the outdoors. In the spring and summer he swam, rolled hoops, sailed toy boats, and flew homemade kites. In the late fall and winter he sledded, skated, and hunted. John hoped to become a farmer, but his father had other plans. He taught his son to read, then he sent John to a local one-room school where he learned to write and do simple arithmetic. Later John had a private tutor, and at 16 he entered Harvard College. In 1755, John Adams graduated from Harvard intending to become a lawyer, but first he needed to earn some money, so he took a job as a teacher in a one-room schoolhouse in Worcester, Massachusetts. He taught about a dozen students, both boys and girls, and considered his class the great world in miniature, with several renowned generals and several politicians in petticoats. In 1756, Adams left teaching to study under a local attorney. 2 years later, he returned to Braintree to practice law. In 1759, John Adams went with a friend to the home of Reverend William Smith. His friend was courting Mary, the eldest of the 3 Smith girls. There John met Abigail, the middle sister. She was small, sickly, and just 14. He was short, overweight, and difficult. Neither Abigail nor John was greatly impressed with the other. Abigail Smith was born on November 11, 1744, in Weymouth, Massachusetts, to the Reverend William Smith and Elizabeth Quincy Smith. Her mother's family was among the most prominent in colonial Massachusetts. John Adams returned often to the Smith house, sometimes with his friends and sometimes to borrow books from Reverend Smith's library. In time, John and Abigail's feelings changed. He liked that Abigail had opinions of her own. She liked his honesty and wit. When they couldn't see each other, they wrote teasing, playful letters. He addressed her as Miss Adorable and compared her to Aurora, the morning star. She called him my friend and wrote that she thought of him all the time. John Adams and Abigail Smith married on October 25, 1764, in the Smith home. Then they moved to Braintree and later to Boston. They had 5 children: Abigail, who was called Nabby, John Quincy, Susanna, Charles, and Thomas. Susanna died shortly after her first birthday. On March 22, 1765, the British Parliament passed the Stamp Act, a tax in the American colonies on nearly everything written or printed, including pamphlets, newspapers, diplomas, and playing cards. To protect the tax, a Boston mob destroyed British property. John Adams was against the tax, but he didn't approve of what was called such an atrocious violation of the peace. In 1766, the Stamp Act was repealed. The next year, however, brought the townshend duties, taxes on glass, paper, paint, lead, and tea. With the new taxes came new tension between England and the colonies. On March 5, 1770, there was a violence in Boston. A large mob surrounded 8 British soldiers. They cursed and threw snowballs at the soldiers, who shot into the crowd, killing 5 in what became known as the Boston Massacre. The British soldiers were charged with murder, and John Adams was asked to defend them. No one else would take their case. John gave a passionate defense. Facts are stubborn things, he told the jury, and he described what colonists had done to provoke the soldiers. 2 soldiers were convicted of manslaughter. The 6 others were declared not guilty. Adams was proud of his work, and at that trial, people respected his integrity. They understood that even British soldiers deserved a proper defense. After the trial, business in Adams' law office was brisk, bringing clients who were among the wealthiest men in Massachusetts. On March 5, 1770, the same day as the Boston Massacre, Parliament repealed all but one of the township duties, the tax on tea. On December 16, 1773, in protest, colonists dressed as American Indians dumped 342 chests of English tea into Boston Harbor. Members of Parliament were furious and closed the port of Boston, which cut off trade and basic supplies. They forced American colonists to feed and house British soldiers. These and other laws became known in America as the Intolerable Acts. The flame is kindled, Abigail wrote to a friend. The American colonies were headed towards revolution. In September 1774, John represented Massachusetts as the Continental Congress in Philadelphia. He and the other delegates protested the Intolerable Acts and resolved to prepare for war. On March 19, 1775, shots were fired at Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts. The war with Boston had begun. John Adams returned to Philadelphia for the Second Continental Congress. His family remained in Boston, dangerously close to the battlefield, with more than 300 miles separating them. John and Abigail wrote each other letters, but these were less playful than the letters they wrote when they were first courting. The constant roar of the cannon is so distressing that we cannot eat, drink, or sleep, Abigail Adams wrote. She also warned her husband to be generous and favorable, but not to put too much trust in delegates who had slaves. John Adams served in Congress until February 17, 1778. Then he sailed to France, where he and Benjamin Franklin served as diplomats of the new American nation. John's and Abigail's 10-year-old son, John Quincy, sailed with him. The next year, their son Charles joined his father and brother. John Adams and his son spent most of the next 10 years in Europe. With her husband away, Abigail Adams managed the family's home and money. She missed her husband and sons, but she wrote that she felt a pleasure in being able to sacrifice my selfish passions to the general good. The Treaty of Paris in 1783 formally ended the American Revolution. King George III and the British Parliament officially recognized the new nation, the United States of America. In 1784, Abigail and Nabby joined John and the boys in London, where beginning in 1785, John served as America's first ambassador to Great Britain. By the time they returned home, in March 1788, a new federal constitution had been drafted. In February 1789, George Washington was elected the nation's first president.